Okay, it looks like the logins are leveling out, so let's go ahead and get started. So hello everyone, welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I am Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor and trainer. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So just a reminder, as always, that if you are attending live, you're in listen-only mode, and there is a Q&A box. You can just start to typing your questions now. Just go ahead and load those up, and I'll be answering questions live. I also have a couple of questions that were sent to me ahead of time, so I'll be answering those as time allows, and we have a mini tutorial today as well. So if you're watching this as a recording, and I know we have a growing audience of people who are watching this as a recording, it is June 12th, 2024. So everything I say today is true to the best of my knowledge as of that date, but things change very quickly at NIH. So always verify that what I'm saying is still accurate at NIH. So what you should be viewing in the library now, we should be getting that Master the R Series course up this week. We finally heard back from the Massachusetts Medical Society with their approval for the CME certification for Master the R Series and the first 4 chapters of Master the K Series. I think they just sent us the number of credits for it, and my team is loading that into the LMS as we speak. So that should be up there, God willing, this week within the next day or two. So if you are gearing up for a cycle 3 deadline, that would be like a deadline in October or November, I would suggest that you start with chapter 1, which is all the prep steps, and chapter 2, which is writing the specific aims page. In terms of updates to NIH is gearing up to release more information about the new form set that will be launched on January 25th. So we will be covering that information as we get into the fall. They have not released all the information about the updates to the BioSketch, which are coming. I know that they just had a webinar on changes to the training grants, the T-Series training grants, which I was not able to attend, but I registered, so I'll be able to watch the recording of that now that I'm out of most of my deadlines, and I'll be reporting on that as well. So that is what is new at NIH. So and I see more people have joined since I started. Feel free to start loading up your questions into the Q&A box. And otherwise, I'm going to do a screen share with the tutorial today. Okay, so you guys should be seeing the scientific rigor scoring criteria. Is that up on people's screen right now? Okay,
Yes.
okay, great. So one of the things that I want to point out, and these are, you'll recognize if you've seen chapter 4 of Master the R Series, you'll recognize some of these slides, but there are some new ones in here. And one of the things that I want to point out is that in the new scoring criteria, which will come online for deadlines on or after January 25th, approach is being replaced with factor 2 rigor and feasibility. And one of the things that I want to point out is just how much space is devoted to rigor and somewhat to feasibility as well. But you can see that, I don't know if people remember, but the approach scoring criteria, there's quite a lengthy list, which in my training I've broken out into bullet points. Several of them deal with rigor and feasibility. This is going to be changing, and a huge amount of the sub-scoring criteria within Factor 2 are going to be dealing with rigor and feasibility. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit about how one handles this. So the real problem is most people handle this within the approach section of the research strategy, or sometimes in other sections, but it's typically handled in the approach section of the research strategy. And there are so many things, particularly for the non-clinical trialists, there are so many things that you have to shoehorn into the approach section that often people are looking for samples of a cogent way to address this scoring criteria that isn't going to require 3/4 of a page to satisfy reviewers. So this is one from a K01. So this is from a client of mine at Arizona State. And here she wrote this language having to do with autism spectrum disorder. I'm just going to give you a moment to scan this. So, and these are, so people know, these are all from funded applications. This is one from an R01. I'm not going to have you read the whole thing. This is in the training, but this had to do with reproducibility and transparency. And the whole point of this project was to develop a methodology that the goal was to distribute it widely. So it was kind of a slam dunk in terms of reproducibility and transparency, because the whole point was to get other people to use it after they did the study. So he kind of gave number by number. You know that I love formatting to facilitate skimming. So he kind of like listed out the ways that he was going to enhance reproducibility and transparency. This is a new sample that I got from my client Susan Linder at the Cleveland Clinic. This is from an R01 that was just funded. So here and this is, the next two samples I think are probably going to be very useful for people, because often what I hear from clients is, I've already described rigor all over the place in the application and my methods when I talk about randomization, recruitment and randomization, when I talk about the data analyses. How am I supposed to then restate it in this rigor section? Do I have to have a rigor section? Some people don't have a rigor section. They just kind of take it on faith that reviewers will understand that they covered it in other sections. I really prefer a method where you're kind of summarizing what the rigor was. So that's what Dr. Linder did here. So she talks about the different types of things, numbered. And you could actually number these and put them in a text box and drop the font size down to 9 point. And have the numbers justified to the left margin. But I think this is effective, and she was funded. But the thing is, she talked about each of these things in other parts of the approach. So she talked about the randomization and the rater blinding, etc., in other sections. She's just reminding reviewers, hey, that thing I talked about earlier? Well, let me just remind you that that's part of how I'm enhancing rigor. So that's one way to do it, to kind of summarize it that way. Another strategy that I've often used with clients, and this is, I've anonymized something that I developed for another client and I often use. If you're using an outline system in your approach section, it's typically A, significance, B, innovation, C, approach. Just by convention, that's what most applicants are using these days. And then within approach, because on an R01, your approach section might be like 10 pages of the 12-page research strategy, you're probably going to have subheaders. So for example, C1 might be like overview, C2 team, C3 preliminary data, that kind of thing. And you might have subheaders even beyond that. So if you employ an outline system like that, the nice thing about it is that when you write a summary like this, like a scientific rigor summary, you can refer to those sections. So we'll employ XYZ methods to address missing data. And then instead of re-explaining what you're going to do in terms of the missing data, you just refer your reviewers, just jog their memory and say, hey, go back to C3 too if you want to see the details on that, etc. So that's another thing that can be very handy. This one I really like. I did not develop this. One of my clients developed this, and I use it with permission. I just love it. So she broke it down by aim, and then the columns are rigor and reproducibility. And the nice thing about using a strategy like this is that it's easy to skim. You don't have to use full sentences because you're bulleting. and you can drop the font size to 9 points. So this is a real space-saving strategy in terms of how to address what you want to say there. So all of these samples that I'm providing are available in Chapter 4 of Master the R series. The one from Susan Linder is in the new recording, which will come out this week. And of course, you can see them in the slides as well, which are available as a download, a course supplement download at the beginning of the course in the learning management system. And then, of course, NIH has, the website is here, and the URL is also in the URLs as a course supplement download. But they also give you samples of how people have handled these. These have not been updated in a while. A lot of them date back to 2016 when they first started doing it. But I still think they're relevant, and I still think it's worth looking at these. So this is all just a way to say there are many ways to skin a cat, with apologies to my cat who is sleeping in the background. So think about what makes the most sense for you in terms of finding a space-saving way to be convincing to reviewers about scientific rigor. None of us have a crystal ball, so we don't know what things are going to look like in terms of, and I'm just going to stop my screen share here. None of us know what things are going to look like in terms of the new scoring criteria, and until we actually get a set of summary statements and start reading what reviewers are saying about various things. But I think it's pretty clear from what we are seeing in terms of the instructions that this trend toward increasing emphasis on rigor, reproducibility, and transparency is only going in one direction. So I just wanted to share some strategies as we gear up for these new scoring criteria, some strategies to make sure that you are finding ways to very clearly address these issues with reviewers that will not gobble up a lot of space in the approach section. Okay, so I am gonna, and feel free to ask me any questions. I am gonna turn my attention to answering questions that are typed in here and ones that were sent to me ahead of time. So here's a question. I wonder how important it is to include deep learning, aka AI, to support data analysis in a grant application, even though the task may be accomplished using conventional non-DL statistical methods. I have a mixed experience before. On one hand, reviewers asked why not use DL, especially for data analysis that involves images like CT or MRI. On the other hand, if the data analyses use DL, reviewers said the lack of novelty since the bar of training DL becomes quite low with all the models available in the public domain. I would like to ask for advice for proper strategies. My guess, and this is just a guess, and if anybody else wants to weigh in, of course, feel free. My guess is that this is going to be a moving target, and that this is going to be rapidly evolving with time, and it probably varies by study section, and not just study section, but a specific set of reviewers on a given study section at a given time. I think this is going to be something that's going to be evolving pretty rapidly over time. My guess is that where reviewers are going to land eventually is on whatever is most expedient and least expensive to do. So if anybody has, while still yielding something that's high quality, if anybody has a thought on this or experience on this, let me know, because this is just a complete guess on my part. So yeah, let me know what you think. In terms of questions I got ahead of time, and I know some of these, some of you have actually went to the boot camp yesterday, and some of these were actually asked at the boot camp and answered there, but I'm going to ask them again, answer them here. I was wondering if you have a sense of whether writing an R01 as an MPI makes sense when I'm starting out as an ESI. Are there pros and cons? I ask because a senior collaborator suggested that we write an R01 together, but I'm not sure if that has implications on my ESI status. Should I just write the R01 on my own? So as I discussed yesterday, and I'll just keep it brief because I did discuss it in the Q&A of yesterday's boot camp, ESI confers a significant funding advantage, and it's only for people who are 10 years or less from their terminal degree and have not been a PI on an R01 or equivalent. And in order to get that funding advantage, all of the PIs have to have ESI status. So if you're ESI and you propose an MPI plan with a mid-career or further person, you lose your ESI status. So typically, the probably the best strategy in almost all situations, this isn't true absolutely every single time, but in most instances, it will be a better idea either to write it as a solo PI or as a multi-PI plan, but with another ESI applicant. And the other reason for this is that if you're clearly junior, right? Because you're an ESI, and if you are writing with somebody who's more senior, particularly if that person was your mentor, it can be very easy for your goal with a first R01 is to launch your independent research career. And if you're writing with somebody else who's more senior, and they're a PI, it can eclipse your role on the project. You're really demonstrating your chops in terms of leading a project. And so my concern would also be that if you're doing a multi-PI plan with somebody who's more senior, that on a follow-up R01, that reviewers are kind of going to assume that the other person ran it and that you were kind of subordinate to them. So for many reasons, it's probably better not to do a multi-PI plan with that more senior person. Okay, I have had a big hit with the reviewers regarding sexist biological variables. When I look at the NIH website, it states, does the proposal demonstrate plans to report data disaggregated by sex? What suggestions do you have to evaluate sex as a biological variable in human and mice studies? So there are several ways to handle this, and I don't know if you're asking because when you say you've been dinged on your summary statements by reviewers, you want in an ideal world, what you would say is that you're going to recruit equal numbers of male and female subjects, or if you're using human biospecimens, that you're going to know the sex of the biospecimens and make sure that you have equal representation, or if you're doing animal studies, that you will use equivalent numbers of male and female mice, for example. And that when you go to do your data analyses, you'll do a comparison to see if there are sex differences. The problem comes in is, in my experience, applicants run into a problem when they don't have a large enough budget or enough time to recruit or use a large enough sample to get a statistically significant result to power that sub-study. So that's where people tend to run into problems. So I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question by saying this, because the obvious thing in the ideal world is to use equal numbers of male and females, and then your data analyses to look for differences between the sexes to see if there is a sex difference. If you can't do that because the sample size aren't large enough to power the sub-study, there are ways around that. So one of the things that I do is have people write in several places, one of which would be in the sexes biological variables, to say we're going to make an effort to use equal numbers, and we're going to look at differences, sex differences in the outcomes. However, in the current project, our budget or time is not adequate to power that sub-study, but we will look at trends in the data to inform a follow-up R01 where we will have a large enough sample size to power those sub-studies to look at sex differences. So that's one way to do it. Similarly, you can use that language in the future directions section where you say, we're going to look at trends in the data in terms of sex differences, even though we don't have a large enough sample size to power that sub-study. The trends in the data will inform the follow-up R01 where we will look at, have a large enough sample size to power that, even if you don't plan on doing it. Just saying that in various places in the application will let reviewers know that you understand that this is something important to do, and that, you're trying to manage your time and your budget, and you realize that the sample size isn't big enough. So let me know if there's another reason why you've been running into a problem there. But that's typically it. You want to use or recruit an equivalent number of male and female. You want to look for significant differences in your data analyses. And if you can't do that because of limits to, time, budget, etc., you want to say that and say, like, we're going to look for trends in the data and it'll inform a follow-up R01. So let me know if I answered your question, and if not, give me a little more information. Okay, saying sex assigned at birth is more words than male, female, or men, women with humans. If only doing cisgender sex differences due to the fact that there is zero formula for pharmacology formulas for transsexuals. How best to handle this? I would prefer to be very respectful, yet use as few words as possible. My research is with humans. I cannot dose trans folks on hormones for safety reasons. So I think in a situation like this, and this is going to come up more and more, there is an office for, I think it's called the Office of Sexual and Gender Minority at NIH. And I think there is going to be more money put into research on people who are transgender. I think what you can do is define your terms in the beginning of the project so that you don't have to keep using a lengthy, cumbersome term. So you can say right up front at the beginning of your significance section, potentially even in a little text box in the upper right corner of the significance, which is the beginning of your research strategy. Here, for our purposes, we are defining male and female as people assigned male or female at birth. And because we are dosing with hormones, we can't recruit people who are transsexual. And you can say that again in your inclusion exclusion criteria. You could say an exclusion criteria is somebody who's transsexual, because there would be confounds in the data, because you can't dose them with hormones. They may be dosing with hormones already, etc. But I think if you define your terms up front, I think you're acknowledging that this is a thing. You're also acknowledging that within the setting of this particular project, it doesn't make sense to include people who are transsexual for the following reasons. And even though we understand that we're talking about people assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth, for expediency in this application, we will be calling them male and female, but we all understand that that's what we're talking about in this application. So I think that's how I would handle that. If people have other suggestions, though, let me know. But yeah, I've seen people do that kind of thing where they define a term at the beginning, particularly where it's something a little sensitive like that, just to make sure that everybody's talking about the same thing. Okay, another question I had that was emailed to me ahead of time, and feel free to type any in, we still have 5 minutes. Somebody had asked about the types and structures of NIH NOFOs. What are parent announcements, clinical versus non-clinical trials, etc. And they said, as a newbie, this is very hard to grasp. So I think I answered this in the boot camp yesterday, and I don't know if the person was attending. But I think this came in an anonymous survey after the last boot camp, but I will say the vast majority of you have free access to the whole library. And what I would encourage you to do, if chapter 1 in Master the R series, where we talk about NOFOs and selecting a NOFO, if that feels too quick and not in depth enough, I have a whole course devoted to selecting your NOFO and understanding the differences between PAs and RFAs and parent announcements and search engines to select them, and clinical trial versus not clinical trial, and different mechanisms, K versus R, etc., and flow charts for selecting them that I've developed. That's all in a course called Optimize Your Funding Mechanism, which I updated, I want to say this past spring. I want to say like maybe February. So have a look at that. Okay, so getting back to that issue with the sex and biological variable, the person who's been dinged on that, he says, thank you for the response about gender. This is what they say. There should be an intentional focus on balancing recruitment by sex within the 3 different CRS treatment cohorts. I'm going to state 60-40%. So if you can't recruit equal numbers of male and female, hopefully you have a reason for that. Hopefully you can justify it. So if you have a situation where it's justified to have an unequal number of male and female, for example, maybe whatever disease you're looking at or condition that you're looking at is more prevalent in one of the sexes, then say that. But if they're really coming down hard on you for this 60-40 balance, then you got to try to make it 50-50. And like you're gonna hit your recruitment goals for one of the sexes before the other one. But it sounds like they're and I apologize, I don't remember what condition you're studying. I should know this because we've worked together. I think I know what it is, but that would be my answer. Is I think if they're really coming down hard on you about that, unless you can justify why you're recruiting more than 50% of one of the sexes, in other words, it occurs predominantly in this particular sex, then I would make an effort to recruit 50-50 and just know that you're going to hit your recruitment goal on one of the sexes before the other one. Okay, and another question from the same person. One more question. Specific aims page. Can we go back and forth in background data? I worry sometimes if the whole initial paragraph is background, the reviewers may get bored. Have you used the strategy of going back again on background data and specific aims page? Yeah, I've seen specific aims pages and actually research strategies written in all different ways. And I really love when applicants find an interesting and engaging way to tell the story. So I think that's a great idea to experiment with going back and forth. And I think as long as you are making it easy to read, making it engaging, and facilitating skimming. So you're, underlining or bolding keywords like preliminary data, knowledge gap, and things like that. I think it's wide open. You can tell your story in whatever way you want, especially the narrative overview of a specific aims page is like a half a page maybe, or a third of a page if you don't count the we propose paragraph. So I think it's okay to go back and forth. If that's an intuitive way for you to tell the story, one of the things that I would encourage you to do is run it by somebody outside your field. It doesn't even have to be somebody in biomedical sciences necessarily. It could be like your partner or a friend. And just have them read the paragraph and say, does this make sense to you? Or does it feel disjointed because well, don't even set them up for that. Just have them read it and say, does this sound like an intuitive way to tell this story? Does this make sense to you? And just see. And then after they give you feedback, say, did you find it confusing that I was going back and forth presenting the background information? And see how it lands. But I love it when people kind of play around with different strategies. I like when people make an effort to tell an exciting story. Like for those of us who read, 100 applications a year, it can be very nice to have an applicant who's making an effort to tell a good story. So I would experiment with it. Why not? You do that. So we're at time. Thank you all for coming. Let's see, next session. I have a guest, Dr. Veronica Redman, who is a fellow Mount Sinai Medical School alum. She and I both went there. And she will be talking to us about the SBIR, STTR programs at NIH and NSF. These are a mechanism that I no longer write. I haven't written them in years. And she has a thriving business working on these mechanisms. So if this is of interest to you, I would encourage you to come on June 26th, it is, 2 weeks from today. So, And otherwise, I hope to see many of you back at on Tuesday at the next installment of the boot camp, where we will be doing chapter 2, specific aims. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you. I appreciate all the great questions you guys ask, and I appreciate you coming back week after week. So thank you, and I will see you next Tuesday or the following Wednesday, whichever one you come to. Take care and good luck with your grant writing. Bye-bye.